You don't want to just jump around all the time making totally different looking stuff that looks like what you saw online or looks like what some teacher taught you.
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of personal thread is important.
Hello, all my ever-changing, ever-exploring artists out there. Thank you for joining me on the Sage Arts Podcast. This is Sage, and I'm going to just do a really quick introduction because we have a somewhat lengthy interview, but it's just such fantastic information. I couldn't really find a lot of areas to cut down and cut out and leave you out of the conversation that I had with this wonderful artist I have for you today. But before we do get into that, I do have a little bit of an announcement to make. I really rallied against doing this. I don't want to be doing this, but I'm going to have to be taking a break from the podcast for a little while. And I'm probably going to be out definitely for June, July, maybe even August. Unfortunately, there's just too much going on, in my life. The puppy River had that surgery and is going to be going through physical therapy. And for various complicated reasons, Brett is not going to be able to help with that. And then I have other family members who need some things. And I just need to get back to my own work as well, including a poetry collection, which I've been working on quietly for like over a year. And it's gotten to a point where I feel like it just needs to get done. So hopefully during this time, I can manage that. And if I do, you'll probably hear about that as well. So I'm going to take a break from the podcast in order to kind of get all that personal stuff straightened out. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to be working on it. So if you continue to have comments or things you want to tell me or things you want to request, you can write to me at the sagearts.com website on the contact page. I will still be checking in and involved in all the day-to-day stuff, just not actually producing, so I can take more time for all this other craziness that I have in my life. Plus, it's summer. You guys going places, right? We're doing some vacations. We've got some family get-togethers, those kinds of things that are probably going to keep you a little busy too. At least I'm hoping, because I get a lot of comments from you all about how much you look forward to this and what it does for you and keeping you motivated. So I apologize. I am going to have to take that time out, but go back and re-listen to some of the older episodes if you feel like you need a little creativity boost or whatnot. I also have vague notions of maybe doing some little videos I can put up on Instagram or something just to keep in touch. And because I'm going to miss you all, I really am not looking forward to not being on this side of the mic and having these conversations with you. But got to take care of the family and the furries and all of that. So for those of you who donate on a monthly basis, I don't seem to have a way to put that on hold. So if you want to halt that because I won't be producing, I absolutely understand. Don't donate to this when I'm not producing. If you're listening to us regularly anyways, if you want to donate because you just started listening and you heard all these and you want to throw some money at us to keep us going in the future, that's fantastic. And if you do want to donate, then you just go to the homepage of thesagearts.com and there's buttons halfway down the homepage, or go to the show notes or description section of wherever you are listening to this podcast from. But for those of you with the monthly recurring donations, go ahead and either put it on hold or cancel. I'm not sure how it works from your end, but write me if there's any issues or you're getting this notice later and the payments have already gone through. And then get the newsletter, go to the homepage of the sagearts.com website and just click that news and notices button if you're not getting the newsletter already. So that way you'll get a notice when the episodes are returning. And if I do any bonus things because I'm missing you, then you'll know that those things are out, because I will send a newsletter out when there's any news related to the podcast. For those who want to be kept updated about River's progress, I'll post something on Instagram so you can, see pictures of her cute little purple polka dotted casts and just let you know what's going on. But basically, her healing's gone really well. The surgery went really well, and the surgeon is really happy with her progress thus far. But she has another few months before she can resume her, something like the level of energy she had before. But it's like half of her puppyhood is going to be spent dealing with this poor thing. But in any case, go to the Sage Arts podcast page on Instagram to get those and any other updates I might be doing in my little podcast sabbatical or whatever it is. I'm at least really glad that I am going to leave you this summer with just an amazing interview with an amazing artist. I have interviewed just some of the most interesting and really prestigious, hardworking, experienced artists, but I don't know if anyone I've interviewed so far quite has the level of experience and success in art as my guest today. She has garnered some of the biggest awards in the crafts art world in the United States for sure. She is in museums all over the United States and even overseas. And she has been in her field for like half a century. So I am so pleased and happy to be able to have this conversation with the wonderful Kathleen Dustin. And we're talking about a favorite subject of mine, which is about evolving both our art and ourselves as artists. So let's step back 6 weeks and come join me and Kathleen for a conversation about Kathleen's journey, her evolution as an artist, the things that she's learned about evolving your art and your evolution as an artist. So grab that comfy cup of tea or coffee or a glass of wine, whatever it is that you need, and kick back and enjoy this great conversation. So my guest today is Kathleen Dustin. She is one of a handful of pioneers in the U.S. bringing polymer clay into the art, jewelry, and fine art world. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, this really is wonderful, Sage. I've been looking forward to this for a while because I've loved your podcast and I've listened to some of the other interviews too. Yeah.
Yeah. I was so excited to have you on here. You've been on my list since I started this. And I'm like, I know she's so busy and I'm always afraid to bother people. But great. I'm so glad we were able to work this out and get together on this. And today we are going to be focusing a lot more on you and your journey and things than I often do. So you're going to have to talk a lot about yourself. You okay with that?
Yeah. It's not hard to talk about yourself, actually.
That's great. Okay, so let's start out with just tell our listeners what is your artistic focus, how long you've worked as an artist, what mediums you have worked in, because you've done a little bit more than polymer clay, right?
Yeah. Well, my focus has been polymer clay for almost 50 years.
Gee.
I can't believe it. It's like, gee, was it invented then? But actually, my background, I have an MFA in ceramics.
Right.
And so it was very easy to move from regular ceramic clay to polymer clay.
Right. And as I remember, you did that because you moved a lot back then.
Yeah, because of my husband's job, he worked for a government contractor. We lived in Saudi Arabia, which is actually where I first picked up polymer clay, was in a children's store that I picked up some Fimo. That would have been early 80s,
Wow,
like
yeah.
1980. Well, actually, I became introduced to it in 1972. A friend gave me some.
Wow.
But it was in the 80s that I first used any of it.
Yeah.
And then we also lived in Turkey. And I was thrilled to live in these places.
Sure.
And I couldn't bring a ceramic studio with me.
That'd be rough.
So I started working in polymer and I just decided to bring polymer with me. And so I'd bring a whole, big boxes full. And I could, just work with it in my house.
Yeah.
So when I came back to the U.S., I never went back to ceramics.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And for those people who aren't familiar with polymer clay and its history, it was, the invention of it was in the 50s initially, but for a completely different application. It was an art. And then someone decided it worked well as a children's art material. And so really in the 70s and 80s was the first time that there were multiple people working with it.
Right.
Most people didn't know what it was and they didn't have access to much in the way of polymer clay. So this is really the start of the history of polymer clay as an art material with you and just a few other people.
Yes, just a handful. And what's interesting, we didn't have any of this in terms of social media.
Right.
And I'm thinking the internet wasn't even really that big yet.
Yeah.
And we all thought we were inventing. I thought I invented cane work.
Right.
And so did some of the others.
Right.
And then I wrote this article for Ornament magazine called The Use of Polymer in Bead Making. And that was in 1986.
Yeah.
But people started coming out of the woodwork. I met Ford and Forlano. We had all started about the same time. I met Tori Hughes, Cynthia Toops. And it was like, you mean somebody else is doing this too, right?
Yeah.
And actually making jewelry out of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Isn't it so interesting that so many of you were doing this at the same time, working all these things out separately, but at the same time in the history of this art material.
I really do think it's a material whose time had come.
Right, exactly. So that was amazing. So yes, you're one of the pioneers. You're out there in the beginning, inventing so many of the techniques that are used now or co-inventing,
right,
as it were. It's wonderful to hear about your journey, because starting out from that point to where you are now, and this being the basis of our conversation, there was a lot of evolution. There was a lot of change. But before we get into that, because we're going to hear a lot more about your journey, just tell us a little bit more about you. Where do you live, and what other passions do you have, maybe besides polymer art?
I live in New Hampshire, and I live 3 miles from a village. I live in the woods.
Yeah, you live outside a village. I love that.
Yes, I know it.
No villages
but
here.
The village has an art gallery, and so it's quite artsy around here.
Yeah,
actually, yeah. And we've been here about 20 years. So I'd always lived in big cities before moving here. And I thought, oh, man, am I going to like living in the woods? And it took me about a year to adjust.
Yeah.
But I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And part of the reason was with my career, I had to go away to the big shows to sell my work.
Sure.
And so that's when I went and got my city fixed.
Yeah, yeah. And then you come back to all the woods and all the inspiration that must entail. Yeah.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I know you from polymer art, and I don't know if we've ever discussed anything else. Do you have other things that you do? I mean, not necessarily in art, just in general, other passions that you have.
In general, I would say art is my passion. I mean, I'm involved in church, and now I have 6 grandchildren. So then I like riding a bike around in New Hampshire. It's quite gorgeous.
Oh, I can imagine.
But other than that, I would say, I mean, I live in my studio.
Yeah, yeah. I understand that. Me too.
Yeah, really.
So what would you say your family and friends say that you do?
I would say they would say I'm an artist. I've actually, self-defining. I call myself an artist, but also a maker and also a master craftsman. But yeah, they would say that.
They're she's an artist. We're going to just leave it at that. Go talk to her.
Right. That's right. Because that's where I've spent all my time from when my kids were babies. I really was fortunate in having wonderful parents, because I came from a family that did a lot of making, and one of my grandfathers was a landscape painter, and my mom, she really was an excellent seamstress, and she was always making things.
That's great.
And so I grew up in a family thinking, doesn't everybody do this? You just sit down and make something.
No.
So when I was a child, I was gluing toothpicks together. I was carving soap. My mother never sent me to any special art classes. I just, there was like always Elmer glue and toothpicks and cloth around the house.
Yeah.
And I found myself making things. And what's interesting is, so when I went to college, I decided to get a degree in mathematics.
It's so different.
And part of it was a feminist sort of thing, because I went to college in 1969. And I thought, I can do math. Who are all these guys who can do? I can do it too.
Yeah.
So that was part of my reasoning. But when I told my parents I was going to get a degree in mathematics, my mom said, you should be doing art.
She knew.
She just said, you should. She knew.
Yeah.
So I minored in art just to kind of make her happy. And then after I graduated, I worked in computers, and in about 5 years, I realized my mother was right.
Darn it.
So because I'd come home every evening and throw pottery in my parents' basement. So then I went back, and I got married in there too, and went back when I was 28 or 29 and got my Master of Fine Arts degree.
Yeah, you had to.
Yes, yes. Oh, and then another thing is my father told me my parents didn't always say, "Oh, look, Kathy, what you did. Oh, that's so good." Put it on the refrigerator,
Yeah.
which is what parents do now.
Of course.
Kids twist two pipe cleaners together and the parents are, "Oh
They
my
frame
gosh,
it, yeah.
this is so fabulous." My parents didn't say that, but my father said often enough, "I'm so proud of you, Kathy."
Aw, that's great.
Even when I was in my 30s. He said, "I'm so proud of you."
That's wonderful.
So just having that kind of affirmation really made me have a good deal of self-confidence. So
Yeah.
I'm very, very thankful for that.
That's wonderful. That's the kind of support. I think people don't realize how much the verbalization of your thoughts actually matter, especially to children. They don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've listened to so many interviews with other artists, including your podcast. And so often the parents, they just didn't get any affirmation for what they did or what they do. And that actually kind of drives them, I think. In my case, it was the fact that, "Oh, I can do this. Okay, great."
Yeah. I always got, how are you going to make a living?
Right. Well, that's why it was so amazing. I was getting a marketable degree,
Right.
and my parents said, "No, you should be in art."
That's so cool.
Yeah,
I
it
love that.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you consider yourself a planner or a pantser?
That is such a good question.
I am always
have
fascinated by
heard
it.
Yes, I've heard you ask this of some others.
Yeah.
And actually, I decided I am both
Yeah.
in different ways.
Uh-huh.
Now, one thing was when I got my master's, one of the professors was critiquing my work. And he said, "Well, your designs are fine. Your craftsmanship is really good. Why don't you make your work personal?"
Yeah.
Well, that was a very big question to me. And I just kind of, what does that mean?
Yeah.
To make your work personal? What to me? And I thought about it and thought about it. And so from that time, I have always endeavored to make my work personal. Even though I want to sell it out in the marketplace, I'm making it personal. So in terms of planning, I have a little sitting area in my studio, and I'll look out the window and just think, okay, what's important to me right now? What's affecting me right now? What stage of life am I in right now? And how can I bring that out somehow in my work?
Right.
And that has been one of the best things for me. So in that respect, I come up with a concept and then work around in that concept for maybe quite a few years. But I'm always kind of trying to stick to that basic original idea.
Yeah.
But then within that, when I start making something, I'll just have kind of a flash. Like, that's a cool shape. I'll look at shapes and think, I like that shape. Maybe I can use that shape. And then it's seat of my pants.
Yeah.
I just start making. And I might decide in advance what colors I'll use. But I remember a lot of people hearing a lot of artists say, draw, sketch, sketch. Jeff Dever, he sketches constantly.
Oh, I can see that.
Yes. And he's telling his students, draw, sketch. And I want to say, I don't draw.
And I find that interesting because I would have thought you did. Of course, I've seen you do it for other projects, but I know you specifically did it for those projects.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And I mean, I might, if I get a really good idea for a shape, I might draw it quickly just to remember it. Yeah, capture it. But I don't sketch, and I think it's because I really think three-dimensionally.
Yeah.
I don't think two-dimensionally. So to draw is not.
Doesn't transfer that well for
Right,
you. Gotcha.
right. Yeah,
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. I've always struggled with I'm so two-dimensional. Sometimes it's hard for me to go three-dimensional.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
well, that's an interesting thought. Like if you are thinking in three dimensions, working with a piece of paper just may feel so restrictive. And
Right.
how is it going to express
It gives me a silhouette.
Sure.
And maybe I'll mix some colors of clays to get some that I like and try to remember the formula that I use.
You're right. Things
But
like that.
often I'll just be mixing and making.
Yeah.
Because I don't intend generally to make 35 of something.
Yeah.
Unless it's earrings. But even earrings can often be more one of a kind.
Right. Sure. And so your planning part is all this time beforehand, this kind of, I always call it marination of your ideas.
Yes,
Is that what
yes.
you're thinking of?
And sort of thinking of a concept, of an idea. I see so many artists who don't have any grounding concept, grounding idea. They just make what the latest workshop
Right.
was that they
Sure.
took. And, when I was in grad school, when the professor asked me, why don't you make your work personal? The big switch that happened for me in my brain was, before that, I just wanted to make pretty things.
Right. Yep. Mhm.
And everybody wants to make pretty things,
Yeah.
beautiful things. But that's not enough.
No.
That's not enough of a reason. So you need to express yourself in some way. And it can be a little scary because it's
very
like
scary. Yeah.
you want to express pain, maybe. How do you express pain? And okay, then I also want to say that, well, this
I like how
is
excited
all
you're getting.
kind of cool. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's all kind of cool because after working for 5 years for other people, I decided I will never go back and work for someone else.
Yeah.
I wanted to be my own boss
Yeah.
and making the decisions myself. I haven't worked for anybody since then. That's why I hate commissions, too.
Oh, yeah. I'm with you on
I
that
don't
one.
want anybody telling me what to do.
Well, you also have
Right.
to just think, you're trying to think like them and what would they like, and it just blocks who you are and what you can put into the work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then when I did do it once or twice, I'd show them what my proposals were. Well, can't you do this a little this way and make that a little different green? And then it's finally like, why don't you make it?
Right.
Do you want me to make it or not?
Yeah.
I get a little perturbed. I don't often suffer fools gladly. Not great for business.
Well, no.
But, okay. Well, after that experience, I decided, okay, I want to make a living selling my work. And so from, right out of grad school, I got my, registered as a business. And then I realized, because my work is quite detailed, and I also spend a lot of time with the engineering and figuring things
Right.
out,
Mm-hmm.
my work was going to take a long time to make.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make the most I could for that work.
Yeah.
And I knew I wasn't going to be able to bring it to the little local art fair in the park and set up a table and sell my work. I did that right out of college once or twice with my ceramics.
Yeah.
And so I started, fortunately, at the same time here in the U.S., these really wonderful fine craft shows began, like the Smithsonian and the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the American Craft Exposition, which was in Chicago. And I made it a goal for myself to get into those shows. And I knew that was my market.
Yeah.
I had to find my market. And I realized I needed to go somewhere and bring my wares like maybe olden days, and sell my work to the people who would buy my work and spend a good amount of money on it.
Yeah. Right.
And I mean, it was hard just to get into these shows, but I really endeavored. I paid photographers a lot of money. I didn't take my own photographs. I mean, this was at a time when you never took your own photographs.
Yeah.
You know, I thought about a business plan. How much do I need to make per day in my studio in order to make a living doing this? Because the booth fees in these shows are quite high.
Yeah, sure.
But I also realized it takes money to make money.
Right.
So I wasn't going to just bring a tablecloth on a table.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, almost, I had a goal to make a living doing this.
Yeah.
I took it very seriously.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm most proud of now is that I've had a career selling my work.
You have.
And a good career.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't think we've mentioned, but for people who don't know what you do,
yes.
Your primary forms are jewelry
and handbags.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Purses.
Which is very unusual in the polymer community.
In any community.
Well, maybe leather, but...
not leather. Right. Leather is about the only cloth, you know.
Yeah.
And people say, where'd you get the idea of a handbag? And I really do think it was my background in ceramics and making vessels and containers. And the more I learned about using polymer and how flexible it can be if it's baked properly.
Yeah.
And it was one of those epiphanies in the middle of the night. I woke up and said, handbag.
And Dave's like, what?
What? Right. What are you talking about? So then I had to engineer a way to make handbags because I realized polymer clay, I don't have to make square things like you do in leather or maybe even a wood box.
Yeah.
I can make them any shape I want.
Yeah, with a lot of freedom.
So then I started thinking about like Japanese inro and the Netskis, little sculptures, and kind of getting into that. There was a lot of engineering going into it too, because I didn't want to make hinges. So I just made it where there are two holes in the lid that have a cord that goes into the two holes. The cord connects to the bottom of the purse and you slide the lid up the cord.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a very easy, straightforward way, like an inro.
Right.
Yeah.
So you don't have those pressure points you would have with a hinge or something where the wear and tear on it would be.
Which wouldn't be good.
Right. Yeah. So, purses, unusual. And then you do jewelry, like big, bold
art jewelry,
pieces,
statement things.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
I'm not sure where that came from because I was raised in a small town.
Uh-huh.
But it was an artsy town because it was a resort town on Lake Michigan. And so there were wealthy people who came into town, and we had some nice boutiques and we had a couple galleries. So I think I kind of had an urban upbringing in a small town.
Yeah. Well, it sunk in from somewhere. I mean, and also probably from stuff that you saw overseas because... a lot of the more ethnic, I don't know what you call ethnic, or items from the Middle East, they're not dainty.
Well, the material culture of other societies is definitely because they were making a statement with what they wear, what tribe they're from, what status they are.
Right.
They didn't use gold necessarily. We use gold and diamonds and precious gems for status.
Right.
They didn't. And I think that's one reason why I had such travel lust is because I was interested in the material culture of all of these other places that were so different from my own.
So it sounds like we're kind of heading into our subject matter, but I have other questions I usually ask just because it ends up being sometimes a little fun thing we can weave into this. Do you have a favorite guilty pleasure food? I find this so revealing.
I guess my only thing would be, and I don't know how guilty it is I have a glass of wine every single night.
Well, that's
with
for
my
health,
dinner.
right?
Right.
So that's okay.
Yeah,
gotta have that wine. Yeah.
Yep.
So wine. So we can. It's too bad we didn't get a glass. We could just sit in here drinking. I mean, it's a little early, but
loosen me up even more.
Right?
Yeah.
So
while getting into the allowing your work to evolve,
mm-hmm.
I will start out by saying that when I first did the evening bags and purses, they're not. I call them special occasion bags. I was thinking about women and who I am as a woman. At that time, I was a young mother and kids were driving me crazy. And I thought, you know what? Women really are saints and goddesses. And so I started getting into kind of a saints and goddesses idea.
Uh-huh.
So my first bags were actually like the upper half of a female character.
Yeah.
That was stylized, or just the head and shoulders of a female character that you could actually pull the back of her head up and get into the bag. And then that moved into just drawing faces. I looked at Renaissance faces and, beautiful paintings, and I drew them right onto baked polymer clay, then layered over it with translucent clay.
Yeah.
And so then I was getting tired of doing the female faces. But where do I go? Well, at that same time, we had just moved to New Hampshire from an urban setting, seeing lots of museums and all that, to being in the woods.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of walking in the woods. And I actually picked up a little pod, and I thought, what a great purse that would be.
Is that where those, because they just kind of came out of nowhere, I remember.
Right.
Looking at your history, and all of a sudden, that makes so much sense now.
Well, what that shows you, and anyone listening, is to pay attention.
Right.
I feel like our job as artists is to pay attention to whatever, current events, the world around you. Before, I was paying attention to the place of women, my place in the world as a woman. Anyway, so then I thought, oh my gosh, I should just change my work. And so between two different shows, it might have been over the winter time, I completely changed from doing the purses with faces on them to doing pods and buds and sort of surrealistic. They weren't, actual things from nature, but they looked like some kind of science fiction pod or gourd or something.
Yeah.
So people had started to notice my work and collect my work, and everyone came to my booth and said, "Where are the faces?"
I was going to ask how your clientele felt about
Where
the change.
Where are the faces?
Yeah.
And they said, "I came here to buy a face purse."
Sorry.
And I said, "I'm sorry. This is what I have now." Oh, and then they would say, "Oh, darn, I should have bought that one last year when I saw it." And I said, "Yes, you should have."
So you know what you do today.
Well, that's it. I said, artists change their work. And what I wanted to say was, I felt at the time I was taking a huge risk.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I was being pretty courageous about it, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have gone and they could have been, ugh, and everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, what is this weird stuff?" But then I also realized nothing in life that's of any value goes without risk.
Right.
Right. You get married, you take a risk. You have kids, right? Have kids, you take a risk. You need to have courage as an artist. I really believe that. So then I did all the organic pieces. I still like them so very much. But then all of our travels started having more of an effect on me again. And the way craftsmen work in other cultures, they've got a piece of bone or a stone or something, and they just start decorating it. They don't draw. That's maybe why I don't draw either. They didn't draw with pencil on it, on the piece of wood to know where to carve, right?
Yeah.
And so the way to decorate, where you just start putting dots on, and they may not be exactly straight. They might go in a funny way, and then the next row of dots is another funny way. I really liked that because you're seeing the hand.
Yeah.
So I decided to do all this really tedious, intricate work because all these other cultures, they don't have a lot to do, like at night. By firelight, they're making something because it was so satisfying to them. So I've done that series for quite a while now, thinking I want to go into another series. So the thing is, I guess what I want to say is, I don't hop around all over the place and have no focus. I have focus for a time. And I think that's important so people get to know your work. I'm in an organization called the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen, which is a very, very old. They started in the Depression. It's 90, I think this is our 90th year, and we have an art fair that I've participated in for 20 years. And there are some like silversmiths in that fair doing exactly the same things they did when I first started.
Right. Yeah.
And I say I don't say it. I want to say to them, aren't you getting tired of this? And yes, they are, as a matter of fact. So what's happening is their soul is gone. The work is cold. People either have it all now or they're tired of it. They want something new.
But it probably would have been scary for them to change if this is their living.
Yes, extremely scary. Now, that doesn't mean you need to take a complete shift like I've done. You can merge into some new work. You asked one of your guests, do you make your work for yourself or others?
Right.
And I was surprised she said others, because I never make my work for others. I do make, like, say, a certain kind of earrings. I'll make sure it hangs well and it works on people's bodies appropriately, and even a big necklace. But I decided that when I make it for myself, there's something in there that speaks to somebody else. The background, the concept, or the way I do my colors or something. And I found that the few times where I thought, ooh, that's a good idea, I'll bet I can sell 50 pair of those.
Yeah, right.
And I make 50 pair and they just don't sell.
What are you going to do? Uh-oh.
So then they get reduced in price and then reduced. And I realized, no, I personally, now this isn't true for everyone, but I personally cannot make work that I think will sell.
Yeah.
I have to make work that I would buy or others like me would buy.
Yeah.
Now, I'm getting older now. And so am I going to sell to young people or not? I don't know.
It's interesting to note that, I mean, you have to do this for yourself because that's who you are. And I'm trying to think of who it was I asked that question. I do remember that answer coming across because I thought the same thing. I was like, oh, really? Because I'm always talking about like putting yourself into your work, doing it for yourself first, and then the people will come. Because I think, like what you said earlier, we want to make something beautiful, and that's kind of how we start out. But I think if you make something that is of yourself, those people who see that genuine show of yourself in the work, that is the beauty that they're drawn to. Yeah. So some people, though, that do it over and over again, they found their one thing, and they found that one bit of beauty, and it's hard to get away from.
And then, well, what happens is it gets cold.
Yeah, exactly.
If you do millions of them. Yeah.
And here's the parallel. We're talking about how your art can evolve, but we're human beings. We evolve. We are constantly changing. So why would our work not change with us?
Yes.
All that change is scary. Changing as a person is scary. Changing our lives is scary. Changing our art is scary. But we do the things in our life to make things more interesting or better, or to get motivated, or to be passionate, or to be happier.
Well, I absolutely love what you just said. We are not staying the same. Why should our artwork stay the same? And other people don't stay the same either. And the times, the styles don't stay the same.
Right.
And it is a risk you have to take. You have to take it. I say this a lot, but hey, I've been doing this for 50 years.
Yeah.
I feel like I can be opinionated about it.
Well, we're here to find out about your experience.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think some people, maybe a lot of change is too much for them, but some kind of change, being able to, I don't know, I've always felt that being an artist was about exploration, and that never changes. Like that never changes.
Right.
The idea of exploring should never be like, oh, I've already done the exploration, now I'm just making art. I don't think it ever stops.
No.
If you're actually really, involved in your work and enjoying it and putting yourself into it.
Right. By the same token, even though I've done these different series in my life, people still tell me, but I can tell it's yours.
Right? Isn't that interesting?
So,
yeah.
Yes. So, and that's because in the back of my mind always is this personal?
Yeah.
Is this me, or is it the latest 10 pictures I saw on Instagram?
Yeah.
And that's one problem with social media is you see so many great ideas and clever ideas.
Sure.
And wow, how creative is that?
Yeah.
And so I actually have tried to stop looking at Instagram I'll take a little vacation for a few days, or
Me
a
too.
week.
That stuff just gets in your head, and I don't want to be, for myself, I don't want to be comparing what I'm doing to other people. I have my own thoughts, opinions, life, and I want that to come out into the work, not just what I'm filtering through from what I'm seeing, consciously or unconsciously.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not to say I don't look at art books. I don't go to I do. I look at art books. I go to museums. And I am influenced by what artists in the past have done and how people have approached certain things. But that's part of, I think, paying attention to everything. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And finding what it is that you feel connected to in the work that you're looking at.
Right.
That's one of the things I wish we spent more time in museums than we did on Instagram.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it's hard to feel connected to something that you're looking at for 2 seconds, and then you're like, oh, there must be something else and something greater or better, and that's why people keep scrolling.
Yes.
But when you're in a museum, you're like, I'm here for this. And you just spend time with it.
And when it's in real life, the scale is different. I mean, when we look at Instagram, the teeny little things are blown up, and the gigantic things are, it's all the same size. But you're in a museum and you see a painting that's 8 feet across. Yeah. It just, you get blown away, or you see something so minutely gorgeous. So you are right. Oh, I've got to do that more now, too.
Yeah, I know. My husband and I were just talking about that, how you fall into these routines of things that you're doing and taking care of the day to day. And we're here in the LA area. I mean, we're an hour north, but the museums in this area are absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, we're like, yes, we need to go. But we decided we need to make it. We're putting them on our calendar.
Yes.
We're just putting them down. If we're not out seeing them in person, it's just, you're not experiencing it in the full capacity that work has for you.
Boy, isn't that the truth? Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, you're right. Today is museum day. Or now next week is museum day. We can't forget.
Yeah, it needs to be on there because it's so hard to get
Yeah.
lost in everything that we have to do. Life has gotten so complicated.
It's too busy with a bunch of dumb stuff.
So busy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So the evolution that you've had throughout all your years, have you been able to identify any common thread about what pushes you to change what you're doing? Or are there individual circumstances in your life that just kept saying to you, I need to be doing something different?
I would say two things. One is I get tired of thinking in the same way of, okay, what's another shape I can do in this way? And people aren't buying my work as quickly because they're getting tired of it too. And I really, sort of a metaphysical thing is I feel like my soul isn't in it anymore when I'm not getting the response and I'm not feeling as excited about finishing a piece. Then sometimes it's like, darn, I got to think of something new. But by the same token, it also then releases me to like, what haven't I explored yet? Like you said, it's an exploration.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I've never put any like current events or current problems
News.
Right into my work.
Okay.
And I've been thinking about, should I continue with this whole Silk Road stuff? And someone came to me from an organization called Guns to Garden Tools.
Okay.
And what they do is they have events where people can bring guns, whether it's old antique things, of things they don't want, their husband's gun they're really mad at them about, or whatever. They bring a gun and they turn it in. They donate it. They don't get paid for it. As soon as they turn it in, it gets cut in half. Okay. And when it gets cut in half, immediately it's no longer a firearm. You don't have to worry about registration, licensing, all of that. And then artisans make garden tools, like using a long barrel to make a shovel or a hoe.
Okay.
Other artisans have done others, like using the wooden stock and turning little bowls, making little carvings.
Oh.
So a woman from this organization gave me a box of bits and pieces cut up from guns. Handguns, rifles, all of this. And I thought, well, maybe here's my chance to make a statement against gun shootings in schools.
Okay.
And so I think about jewelry. So I strung together some pieces. I didn't string them. I joined them with jump rings, but they're all black. I actually had to work on them quite a bit, grinding off sharp edges, cutting them down because they were too big or too long. And I had to find lightweight ones, not too heavy.
Yeah.
So I have like triggers and half of a magazine that goes into a pistol, but they're all black.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, okay, what can I do? I want to make a statement. So one person suggested I maybe put a little heart somewhere. But what are the mixed messages here?
Yeah.
What are the messages?
Yeah.
Then my daughter suggested, could you change the color? And so I thought, well, as a matter of fact, I could. So I'm going to spray paint them maybe 3 different colors, like mid-century modern colors or something.
Okay.
So that I am fundamentally changing these pieces that are just metal, after all,
Right.
and to soften it somehow. But it's been such a good challenge. I mean, I'm not going to do a whole bunch of jewelry made out of guns,
Yeah.
but it's been such a good challenge for me. And so it's making me think maybe I do want to make some jewelry that makes sort of a contemporary statement against war, against who knows.
Yeah. So you're saying you're at a point right now where you feel like you might want to have more of a message in it than you have in the past.
Right. More of a contemporary message. And actually, I've done a series of sort of modern art pieces. They were kind of woven in with the Silk Road. So these modern art pieces, they were abstract things. I would often put in some kind of a red slash.
Yeah.
And to me, that was representing pain. But yet it looks kind of cool on this thing. To me, it's pain, but nobody else would probably read it as pain. And so I have put in there that you can make beautiful things and there's still some pain involved. Just like life is beautiful, but there's pain involved.
Well, it's often beautiful because of pain being the antithesis. Yeah.
They're beautiful because pain is in there too. So I've kind of made that sort of a hidden message, but it's not really a message. But that life does include pain, and it will include pain in some way. And that's what makes life beautiful.
Right. That's more of an interpretation of your view of life.
Yes.
Than like a message.
Right.
Anti-guns or whatnot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. So your evolution right now, you're just moving into this other thing because of something from the outside that was brought to you.
Yes.
A limitation, really.
Right.
That you have been given to work with. And I honestly find limitations to be, I love limitations.
Exactly.
Because it does force you to think so differently.
Right. And you can be more creative within limitations.
You can really be, yeah.
And that's why what I was going to say is I have also, because I've been a juror in shows and for the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen, sometimes you see a person's work and all they need are 5 images, 5 pieces, and each piece is different than the last. And there's no thread. And so it's important. Even though I have moved to these different series, within each series, there's a thread. Right. So I would say it is important to have a thread in your work. You don't want to just jump around all the time, making totally different looking stuff that looks like what you saw online or looks like what some teacher taught you. Mm-hmm. Some kind of personal thread is important. And when I jury someone's work, if it all is like hodgepodgey, then they don't get in.
And why would you say that is necessary for most artists across the board, either because of the focus or because of the saleability?
I would say focus and saleability, but in terms of saleability, you want people to be able to recognize your work.
Right. Yeah.
And you don't want, I call it being anonymous. You don't want your work to be anonymous, meaning it looks like 25 other people could have made the same thing.
Right.
So some kind of personal thread, important, both for shows and exhibitions and for selling.
Yeah. So if somebody is in an exploratory phase and they're making a bunch of different types of things because they are exploring, do you think at some point they need to find that thread and then explore that singular thread? Or do you think they just keep exploring until they find what it is they want to do and not worry about the thread? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I can understand, because way back when I first started, I was just making pretty things.
Right.
And then when I started to make it personal, I actually went to my family. And my very first things in ceramics were the interiors of my relatives' houses, because I came from immigrant background and they'd all come at the turn of the last century. They had lousy taste. And so, there was wallpaper on one that did not go at all with wallpaper on the other. And
I remember some of your early work. You did that with polymer too. Yeah.
And then with polymer, I made some little ones. Yeah. But I made large wall sculptures that were sort of 3-dimensional, and it was all memories of my relatives' houses from South Chicago.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's how I made it personal. But I took a long time to think about it, and it was an idea that got me excited. And
Right.
so I would say, yes, keep exploring, especially with techniques, because if you don't know the material, it's hard to think of a concept that you then can do with the material. You do
Right.
need to get really confident with the material.
Right.
So, yes, that definitely is important. But then at some point, it might be a good idea to, like, say, buckle down and, okay, I want to find some way I can make this personal. One more thing, though. I'm getting more excited. I've been working with the women of Samunat.
Right.
And they're this women's shelter in Nepal. And this organization makes polymer jewelry to sell to support themselves, to support the organization. Anyway, so I started working with them. And what's so great and amazing is I had to learn that here in the U.S., and I would say in the West in general, our self-concept is independent. In many other cultures, their self-concept is interdependent. They don't think about finding your own voice and being personal. They want to do it as a group, and they want to know that other people are liking what they're making. And so now what we do is we all get together over Zoom and we try to engage them in sort of group design. And they are so pleased when they came up with something and we really like it. And they say, look what we did. Yeah, they don't say, look what I did.
Yeah. Or so-and-so came up with the idea. Yeah.
Right. So maybe all these words I'm saying, I would not say in Eastern cultures.
Yeah. Well, can you summarize some of this a little bit? What would you say to artists out there? Like, what could they do to prepare for the problems that might come up when they try to evolve as artists?
Oh, that's a hard question. Everyone else says that's a good question. That's a hard question.
Well, in your experience, is there anything that you did, because the risk can be so scary? Are there things that you think that we can do either to ameliorate the potential for risk or failure, or at least, encouragement for, even if you do fail, there are things that can come out of it that are worthwhile?
I would say now, perhaps not doing it as drastically as I did, making a cut with your older style. And I would say merge, probably. Yeah. You start to test out some of the new ideas.
That makes
have
sense.
A small, like if you have a booth or even online, have a small section that's the new idea. And announce it, propose it, say, look, I'm so excited about my new work kind of thing. And I've seen people do that actually online.
Yes.
I think part of the reason I was able to do it so drastically is because I have a pretty good self-image.
Yeah.
A pretty strong, I don't care if you don't like it.
That helps.
Yeah, right. Sort of, don't tell me what to do kind of thing. Yeah. I should just tell you one funny little story from when I was 2.5 or 3, and we rented an upstairs apartment somewhere, and so you had to climb all these stairs. So one time at this age, I'm climbing this whole flight of stairs, and my uncle came behind me and just scooped me up and brought me upstairs. And I got to the top and I said, khaki do, because Kathy was my name. And so I said khaki, and meaning khaki do, Kathy do. And I walked all the way down the stairs.
Of course you did.
And then climbed up myself.
I love it. Yeah.
So I think from birth, I was don't tell me what to do,
I got this.
including customers.
Yeah.
So it may not
wow.
have been a good idea, but I think I had enough confidence in the new idea that I
Right.
thought somebody's going to like this,
Yeah,
even if it's
yeah.
not the old customers. But
Yeah.
I think that's pretty unusual, actually, maybe because it actually was a good idea, but I know not every idea I've ever had has turned out well.
Right.
And I've retired a few ideas like, this one isn't working too great.
But you'll never know until you take that risk.
Well,
and-
that's right.
yeah,
Take
yeah.
a chance and actually do the idea. Don't do one piece. Don't do two pieces. Actually explore the idea
Right.
to develop it, because I have learned I don't actually develop the idea until like 3 pieces
Right.
or 4 pieces.
Right.
And, you hate it because like, oh, darn, I spent all that time on that first one and it really isn't great. So, yeah, you need
Yeah.
to push it for a time.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that would be like saying, oh, I'm sorry I took that class. That's what I try to think of, the things that I have to learn through. There are mistakes. I may spend a lot of time on a piece and I'll never show it. Like I'm doing a lot of work right now the last year or two. I've been doing a lot of painting, which I haven't done since after art school. And I'm not showing anybody anything because
Right.
I'm just exploring. This is just learning phase or relearning phase for me. Everything we do doesn't have to be a finished product that you put on Instagram.
That's exactly.
Right? Which is, it's
Exactly.
hard because we want to connect and we want to reach out and we want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. But sometimes it just has to be you and the work. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you may throw it away.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
You may just paint over it someday.
Right, exactly. And that's okay. But that does also bring up the fact that risk, when we're talking about risk, we're not just talking about monetary risk. There's the risk to the ego and the risk to our motivation and stuff like that. So, I mean, having a strong background like you do, having supportive parents and always being a don't tell me what to do kind of person has probably given you a step up, from what other people may have dealt with. But
I have to say, though, I have had shows that were not as successful as I'd hoped.
Yeah.
And I don't feel good.
Right.
And I do reevaluate, think, oh my gosh, my work's so terrible.
So you have 2 glasses of wine that night.
Yes, exactly. And then I think about it a little longer and I think, no, this is good stuff. Those people just didn't know what they were looking at.
That's it.
Right. It's got to be it. I mean, I can understand how artists feel who don't have as much self-confidence, because even when I do a show, I get all of my work out there. It's all set up and arranged and displayed, and I feel very proud of myself, of the work, but I'm also shaking in my boots.
Yeah.
But just for a little bit until the first person comes in and says, oh, wow, look at this. But if there is a man who just walks by, I think, and I don't, I get a little defeated, but I think that's part of being an artist too.
Yeah.
Because we are it's almost like I'm lying there on the ground asking them to inspect me.
Right. Seriously, yeah.
Seriously.
But doesn't that just indicate to you that you're doing the right thing? If you're not a little scared, you probably haven't put much of yourself into the work. Because that vulnerability, that's the scary part.
It is, yeah. I do want to say, though, this is my journey. Right. And I've noticed how different everyone's artistic journey is.
So different, yeah.
They're so different. And I know that there are excellent artists out there in the polymer clay world who've made really good livings selling their work. And they say, I just make what I think looks good. Well, they don't make it personal. Yeah. I was not able to do that. Yeah. And I think that's kind of finding your own trick. Some people are such good artists that all the colors they do, all the techniques they figure out, it just works.
Yeah.
I need to have some underlying thread in there. And then my skills I can develop.
Yeah.
But some people can just work on their skills.
And if that's satisfying to them, that's great. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to say this is how you should do it.
Right.
But I would say, generally speaking, it wouldn't hurt if people push themselves a little more into the vulnerability, personal direction.
Right. And you're not going to know it is for you or isn't for you unless you try. So you try it out. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But now you know, and now you know more about yourself. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we ask a couple of exit questions, so to speak?
Oh, okay.
I just like some things I like to make sure we touch base on. So is there any particular lesson that you learned over your career that you think was the most important thing that you've experienced up to this point?
It's still, I come back to it again, make your work personal.
Yeah.
And in fact, it makes it so that when I go somewhere, well, it's interesting. It's almost the opposite. When I go to like a gallery opening or some kind of a party or gathering, I've decided to start thinking about looking at the other people I meet and thinking, what is their life like?
Yeah.
How are they doing? Instead of just asking, how are you?
We all do.
Standard.
It's just a way to start things.
But kind of turning it around. So there's something about the authenticity, I guess, trying to find an authenticity in another person. And I was always trying to be authentic.
Yeah.
So maybe that would be a good thing to say. Be authentic.
Yeah.
With your work.
Yeah, which is a lot of self-exploration because some people just don't even know what authenticity is, what their authenticity is. Yeah. Yes. But I think that's part of why we do art. At least it's part of why I do art and my writing too. It's like the creative work is a lot of self-exploration if you're approaching it with a idea about making it personal and putting yourself into it. Yeah. Also, we touched on this a little bit, but how do you feed your muse? What kind of things do you do to keep yourself inspired?
I do try to go to museums. I don't go as often as I should.
Yep.
But I have, I love art books. And so I'll go and look at art books at the library or even look through my past art books because it's a visual stimulation. And even if it has nothing to do with what I'm working on or thinking about, it's a visual feast.
Right.
So I do try to feed myself visually, including going shopping.
There you go. I'm doing this for art.
That's right. And I'm going to write it off and deduct it
that
from
dress
my
was
taxes.
absolutely necessary.
Right.
That's hilarious.
But even something like going shopping, it's stimulating with colors and patterns and textures. And yes, maybe you buy something to feed yourself. I'll go for a walk in the woods too. I haven't done that as much. And then here in the winter, it's not
pleasant.
It's not, it's harder to walk in the woods. You see some cool stuff, but I think I'd rather love living where you live than where I don't like the cold
I
that
miss the
much.
weather.
But
I lived in Colorado
I
for 22
do.
years and we actually had all the seasons and now we're like, okay.
I like the seasons, right. I do have to say that. And I like sweaters and everything.
Sweaters and scarves. I just have those all set for when I go visit in Colorado. I'm like, yay! I can take them all out.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, then the last question I ask, because I think this is really important for us to all have our own definition of success. So what would you say your definition of success for yourself is?
It's interesting because I actually thought about this when I was young. What would make me feel successful as an artist? For me, it was making a living doing it.
Yeah.
And getting some affirmation like being in a museum.
Which you have
in the permanent collection.
Done.
And I've achieved my goals and I'm very happy with that. I have no regrets at all. And there were a few years when I was kind of scraping by, And fortunately, I have a husband who makes a living too.
Yeah.
But I did actually support the family during a 2-year time when he got laid off and tried to be an independent contractor, and it really wasn't working.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of that. And make a goal for yourself like that, even though it seems like it's way, way pie in the sky.
You never know. If you don't have those dreams, you can't chase them.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Kathleen, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for all this. And is there any last words or anything that you wanted to say that I didn't cover?
This has been so wonderful. I can't think about anything except I love your podcast.
Thank you.
And I learn, even though I have a lot of skills.
Yeah.
I learn a lot from your podcasts, and I just want to tell everybody, sign up.
Oh, well, go for it.
And support Sage. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Seriously.
It means a lot to me to hear that it's helping even someone as experienced as you. Thank you.
No, it really does. Yeah. In fact, it's one of my ways of feeding myself.
Oh, yay.
Yay. Yay.
And this is why I do it. So I'd love to hear that. Thank you so much.
Great.
So where can people find your work and see what you're doing and where you're going to be, what shows you're going to be at next?
Well, unfortunately, my website got broken, and it was an issue with the photographs. And it was an old system on WordPress.
Okay. Yeah.
They didn't support it anymore.
Yeah.
So you can go to my website to find out my artist statement and my workshops, but no pictures, or 3. Otherwise, the best is on Instagram.
Okay.
Kathleen Dustin.
Okay. Well, we'll put links in the show notes or description section of the podcast player so you have that. And we'll just keep track of you.
Yeah, good.
Right. Well, thanks so much, Kathleen. I really appreciate you coming and talking to me. This is wonderful.
It was wonderful. Yay!
Yay is right. What a great conversation. I just loved getting that insight from somebody who's been in the industry for so long, has had such great success, and done it from such a really human standpoint. As big an artist as she is, she's just like the rest of us. We all go through our moments of doubt, our taking risks or not taking risks, our good times, our bad times, and evolution and the changes that we make as artists and with our art are all part of the journey and part of the experience of being a creative. So hopefully you got a lot out of it. So maybe this summer, make it maybe a point for you to look at what you are doing as an artist. Have you changed? Have you evolved? Have you taken risks? Have you looked at how you're expressing yourself personally? Is your work personal on any level? Again, like we said, you don't have to do that, but if you haven't tried it, you may never know what you're missing or what kind of extra boost your work and your joy in your work can have from those kinds of approaches. So that wraps up our podcast for the first half of the year. And like I said earlier, if you want to reach out to me, I am still going to be doing other work. I'm still going to be in contact. I'm not disappearing. I would like to unplug from everything, but it's just really not a possible thing right now. So reach out to me at thesagearts.com at the contact page. You can write to me through messages or on the post at the Instagram page for the Sage Arts Podcast. And if you receive the newsletter, you can respond directly to it, and that will get to me as well. And if you don't get the newsletter, again, go to the homepage of thesagearts.com and click on the news and notices button to get that newsletter, which I don't send out very often. I do not like to pester people, so you don't have to worry about it being used for anything else or hearing anything but news about the podcast, or I guess me. I think River's in there once too, so maybe a little adjacent things going on. But in any case, all of these links we've talked about, including how to get to Kathleen's Instagram page and go check out her artwork. All the links I mentioned can be found in the show notes or description section of wherever you're listening to this podcast from. Okay, so I'm not going to drag this on any longer. It's a bit of a longer episode this time, but If you just listened to the episode, then you know why. So hopefully it's left you with lots to think of over the summer. So get out there and experience and find new things and novel things to feed your muse. Stay true to your weirdness as always. And I'll see you back here in 2 or 3 months on the Sage Arts Podcast.